Look at that scar. Your kind giving you trouble? Mason's cruel laughter echoes throughout the Soul Brew Cafe, while his fellow cops, Kyle and Trent, giggle as they taunt Aisha Turner. But Aisha, a 32-year-old waitress, stands her ground, her eyes hiding a secret that could destroy them. Welcome to a story of courage and justice that will win your heart. If you enjoy stories of underdogs turning the tables, hit the subscribe button and join our channel for the latest videos. Leave a comment to share where you're watching, Atlanta, New York, or beyond. Why did Mason's video backfire so spectacularly? And what is Aisha hiding beneath her calm exterior? Watch for a shocking twist as a woman's scar becomes a symbol of unbreakable strength. The hum of Soul Brew Cafe in Atlanta was a familiar symphony. The hiss of the espresso machine, the clink of ceramic mugs, and the soft jazz drifting from a speaker above the counter. Under the flickering fluorescent lights, Aisha Turner moved with a quiet grace, her tray of coffee cups steady as she wove between tables. At 32, Aisha's face was a map of resilience, high cheekbones framed by a few errant curls escaping her bun, and eyes that held a storm behind their calm. A jagged scar snaked from her left wrist to her elbow, catching the light like a battle-worn relic. It was a mark she neither hid nor flaunted, though it drew stares, some curious, others cruel. The door chime jingled and the air shifted. 3 white police officers, Mason Reed, Kyle Dawson, and Trent Palmer, strode in, their navy uniforms crisp, their laughter loud and jagged. They claimed their usual corner booth, the one with a view of the counter, where they could hold court. Mason, the ringleader, leaned back, his broad shoulders filling the space, his smirk as sharp as a blade. "Well, well, look who's on duty," he called out, his voice slicing through the cafe's hum. "Scarface herself. What's a black girl like you doing with a mark like that? Gang fight? Or just trouble from your kind?" The words landed like a grenade, and the cafe seemed to hold its breath. A couple at a nearby table glanced over, then quickly looked away. The barista, a young man named Jamal, froze mid-pour, his eyes darting to Aisha. But Aisha didn't flinch. Her hands, steady as ever, placed a latte before an elderly woman who offered a sympathetic smile. "Ignore them, dear," the woman, Mrs. Lena, whispered, her voice barely audible over the officer's laughter. "They ain't worth your time." But Mason wasn't done. He slammed his hand on the table, making the sugar packets jump. "Hey, I'm talking to you, sweetheart. That scar, bet it's from some hood brawl, right? Or maybe your boyfriend got mad and taught you a lesson?" Kyle, lean and wiry with a buzz cut, snorted, adding, "Yeah, probably from her side of town. You know how it is with them." Trent, the youngest, barely out of his 20s, chuckled nervously, but followed their lead, his eyes glinting with a mix of amusement and unease. Aisha approached their table, her steps measured, her posture straight as a soldier's. The scar on her arm seemed to pulse under the lights, a silent testament to battles she'd never speak of here. She set down a pot of coffee, her movements precise, almost surgical. "Your usual?" she asked, her voice low and even, betraying nothing. Mason leaned forward, his small, mean eyes narrowing. "What's the story with that arm, huh? Don't tell me you got it scrubbing tables? What, you burn yourself cooking crack in the projects?" The cafe grew quieter still, the jazz now a faint backdrop to the cruelty unfolding. Mrs. Lena shook her head, muttering to her friend, "That girl's got steel in her. I saw her stare down a drunk with a knife once, didn't even blink." But the officers didn't hear, or didn't care. Kyle leaned in, his voice dripping with mock curiosity. "Seriously, though, what's a girl like you doing in a place like this? Shouldn't you be, I don't know, causing trouble somewhere else?" Aisha poured coffee into Mason's mug, the dark liquid flowing with a steadiness that belied the storm inside her. Her mind sharp and disciplined, cataloged every word, every inflection, every smirk. She'd heard worse, far worse, in places where death was a breath away. These men with their badges and bravado were nothing compared to the chaos she'd survived. But their words stung, not for her sake, but for the others they'd likely hurt, the ones without her strength. "Anything else, officers?" she asked, her tone so calm it seemed to unnerve Mason. He frowned, expecting tears or anger, something to feed his ego. "Yeah," he said, leaning closer, his breath sour with entitlement. Tell us how you really got that scar. Accident? Or did someone put you in your place? For a split second, something flickered in Aisha's eyes. Not fear, not shame, but the glint of a warrior who'd stared down hell and walked away. Mason was too drunk on his own power to notice. She turned to leave, but Kyle called after her. Bet it was domestic. You know how it goes in those neighborhoods. The word those hung heavy, laced with venom. Aisha paused, her back to them, her fingers tightening briefly on the coffee pot. Then she continued to the counter, her silence louder than their taunts. In the far corner, a man in his 40s watched the scene unfold, his coffee untouched. Marcus Reed, no relation to Mason, was a stranger in Atlanta, passing through on a cross-country trip. His weathered face and calloused hands spoke of a life of service, and his eyes, sharp and assessing, locked onto Aisha. There was something in her posture, the way she held herself under fire, that stirred a memory. He'd seen that kind of calm before, in places where survival demanded it. Special forces, he murmured to himself, barely audible. No doubt about it. As Aisha wiped down the counter, her movements deliberate, she caught Mrs. Lena's eye. The older woman nodded, a silent acknowledgement of her strength. They don't know who they're messing with, Mrs. Lena whispered to her friend. Mark my words, that girl's got a story they can't even dream of. The officer's laughter rang out again, but it was forced now, tinged with unease. Aisha's silence, her unshakable calm, was a challenge they didn't understand. Beneath the surface, her mind worked like a machine, filing away every detail. Mason's arrogance, Kyle's venom, Trent's hesitation. She didn't know it yet, but those details were the first threads of a net that would soon ensnare them. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting long shadows across the cafe. Aisha Turner, scarred and unbowed, moved through them like a ghost, her secrets buried deep. But secrets, like scars, have a way of surfacing. And when they did, Soul Brew would never be the same. The air in Soul Brew Cafe grew heavier, as if the fluorescent lights themselves were straining under the weight of the malice spilling from the corner booth. Aisha Turner, her scar a silent sentinel on her arm, moved with the precision of a metronome, wiping down a table near the counter. The jazz playing overhead felt distant now, drowned by the coarse laughter of Mason Reed, Kyle Dawson, and Trent Palmer. Their Navy uniforms gleamed with authority, but their words were a venom that poisoned the warmth of the small Atlanta cafe. Mason, his broad frame dominating the booth, leaned forward, his eyes glinting with a predatory glee. Hey, Scarface, you didn't answer me last time, he called out, his voice loud enough to turn heads. That mark on your arm, bet it's from some lowlife in your neighborhood, right? Come on, give us the story. His laugh was a blade, sharp and deliberate, cutting through the hum of conversation. Kyle, his wiry frame twitching with eagerness, chimed in. Yeah, probably got it fighting over a bottle in the projects. You know how they are. The word they dripped with disdain, a slur wrapped in a smirk. Aisha's hands paused for a fraction of a second, her cloth hovering over a coffee ring on the table. Her face remained a mask of calm, but her mind, honed by years of discipline, cataloged every syllable, every sneer. She'd faced worse than these men, in places where the air was thick with dust and danger. Their taunts were nothing compared to the screams of a battlefield, but they stung, a reminder of the world's cruelty to those it deemed less than. She straightened, her posture as unyielding as steel, and walked toward their table, a tray of fresh mugs in hand. More coffee, officers? She asked, her voice smooth as polished stone, betraying no hint of the fire within. Mason's smirk faltered, his expectation of a broken spirit unmet. He leaned back, crossing his arms. You're a tough one, huh? Most girls like you would be crying by now. So what's the deal? That scar from a kitchen fire? Or maybe you were running with the wrong crowd? His tone was mock curious, but his eyes were hungry for a reaction. Any crack in her armor. Kyle jumped in, his voice sharper now. Bet it's domestic. You know, boyfriend got mad, things got heated. Happens all the time in those parts of town. Trent, the youngest, shifted uncomfortably but added, yeah, or maybe she's just clumsy, dropped a hot pot or something. His laugh was forced, a weak echo of his companion's cruelty. The cafe's other patrons, Mrs. Lena at her corner table, a young couple by the window, Jamal behind the counter, watched in uneasy silence, their eyes flickering between Aisha and the officers. Aisha poured coffee into Mason's mug, the dark liquid flowing with a precision that could shame a surgeon. Her scar caught the light, a jagged map of survival, and for a moment it seemed to pulse with a life of its own. She didn't speak, didn't rise to their bait, but her silence was a weapon, sharp and deliberate. She knew men like these, bullies who thrived on breaking others. She also knew that every word they spoke was a thread she could weave into a noose. Across the room, Marcus Reed sat with his untouched coffee, his gaze fixed on Aisha. The former Delta Force operative, his face etched with the lines of a hard life, recognized the stillness in her movements, the way she held herself under pressure. It was the calm of a soldier, the kind forged in chaos. He'd seen it in Afghanistan, in teammates who faced death with a steady hand. "She's no ordinary waitress," he muttered, his voice low enough to blend with the cafe's hum. His eyes narrowed as he studied her, a memory tugging at the edges of his mind. A woman in combat gear, pulling him from danger under a hail of bullets. Mason, oblivious to the scrutiny, grew bolder. "Come on, sweetheart, don't be shy," he pressed, his voice rising. "You work in a dump like this. You gotta have some stories. That scar's gotta mean something. Jail time? Street fight? Or are you just born unlucky?" He slammed his hand on the table, making the mugs rattle, a cheap ploy to startle her. Aisha didn't blink. She set the coffee pot down, her movements deliberate, and met his gaze. "Just work," she said, her voice low but firm, a single word that carried the weight of 1,000 battles. Kyle scoffed, leaning forward. "Work? What, like scrubbing floors or something shadier? Bet you got a rap sheet longer than that scar." His words were a dare, a challenge to break her composure. Aisha's lips twitched, not in a smile, but in something colder, something that made Trent glance away, uneasy. She turned to clear a nearby table, her back to them, but her ears caught every sound. The creak of Mason's chair, the clink of Kyle's spoon, the nervous tap of Trent's foot. Mrs. Lena, sipping her tea, leaned toward her friend. "That girl's got a fire in her they can't touch," she whispered. "Seen her handle worse than those fools. They're digging their own graves." Her friend nodded, eyes on Aisha, who moved with a quiet efficiency, her every action a testament to control. Aisha's mind, meanwhile, was a machine. For 6 months, she'd been recording the officers' conversations, brags about planting evidence, roughing up suspects, bending the law to fit their prejudices. Her phone, tucked in her apron, held their confessions, each one a brick in the wall she was building. She didn't need to respond to their taunts. Their own words would be their undoing. Every insult they hurled was another nail in their coffin, and Aisha, with the patience of a predator, was content to wait. Mason, frustrated by her silence, tried one last jab. "You know, for a nobody, you sure act high and mighty. Bet that scar's all you got to show for a life of nothing." He laughed, but it was hollow, his bravado cracking under her unyielding calm. Aisha returned to the counter, her scar glowing faintly under the lights, a badge of honor he'd never understand. She caught Marcus's eye, and for a moment, an unspoken recognition passed between them. Two warriors bound by battles unseen. The cafe's hum resumed, but the tension lingered, a storm brewing beneath the surface. Aisha Turner, scarred and silent, was no victim. She was a strategist, biding her time, her patience a weapon sharper than any blade. And in Soul Brew, under the harsh glow of fluorescent lights, the first seeds of justice were quietly taking root. The Soul Brew Cafe, once a haven of clinking mugs and soft jazz, now crackled with a raw, electric tension. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, casting stark shadows across the worn linoleum floor. Aisha Turner, her scar a jagged testament to battles unspoken, stood behind the counter, her hands steady as she polished a glass. The air was thick with the residue of Mason Reed's venomous taunts, his laughter still echoing from the corner booth where he sat with Kyle Dawson and Trent Palmer. Their Navy uniforms, symbols of authority, seemed to mock the very justice they were sworn to uphold. Mason's eyes, small and mean, glinted with frustration. Aisha's unshakable calm had robbed him of the reaction he craved. A crack in her armor, a tear, a plea. He leaned forward, his broad shoulders hunched like a predator denied its prey. "You think you're tough, huh, Scarface?" he sneered, his voice slicing through the cafe's hum. "Let's see how you handle something real." He snapped his fingers at Trent, the youngest officer, whose boyish face betrayed a flicker of hesitation. "Go get Rex. Let's give her a proper test." Trent glanced at Kyle, who nodded with a cruel grin. "Yeah, let's see if she's as cool under pressure as she thinks." Trent hesitated, then pushed out of the booth, his boots thudding against the floor as he headed for the patrol car parked outside. The door chime jangled, and a moment later he returned, a German shepherd at his side. The dog, Rex, strained against its leash, its bark sharp and menacing, shattering the cafe's fragile peace. Customers froze. Mrs. Lena clutched her teacup, Jamal stopped wiping the counter, and a young couple by the window exchanged nervous glances. Mason stood, his smirk widening, as he took the leash from Trent. "All right, sweetheart," he called to Aisha, loosening the leash just enough to let Rex lunge forward, teeth bared. "Show us what you got, or are you scared of a little dog? Bet they don't teach you how to handle this in the projects." Kyle, ever eager, pulled out his phone, hitting record. "Come on, black girl, dance for us," he jeered, his voice dripping with malice. "Or you gonna run like your kind always does?" Aisha set the glass down, her movements deliberate, her face an unreadable mask. She stepped out from behind the counter, her eyes locking onto Rex, then shifting to Mason. The dog's growls filled the room, but Aisha stood her ground, her posture straight, her hands open at her sides. "Kuki G," she said, her voice low and steady, the Vietnamese slipping out in a moment of instinct before she corrected herself. "Keep filming. That video's going to be your downfall." Her words were a blade, sharp and precise, cutting through the officer's bravado. The cafe held its breath, the tension a living thing, coiling tighter with each bark. Mrs. Lena whispered to her friend, "She ain't scared. That girl's face is worse than a dog, mark my words." Jamal, his hands clenched, watched Aisha with a mix of fear and admiration. But it was Marcus Reed, the weathered stranger in the corner, whose gaze burned with recognition. His coffee sat cold, forgotten, as he leaned forward, his mind racing. Aisha's stance, feet slightly apart, weight balanced, eyes assessing, was that of a soldier, a warrior he'd seen before. "Afghanistan," he murmured, the memory crystallizing. "Raqqa, 2018. She pulled me out of that ambush." Mason, oblivious to the undercurrents, let Rex inch closer, the dog's snarls growing louder. "What's wrong, tough girl?" he taunted, his voice rising. "Thought you were all high and mighty. Scared now, huh? Bet that's scars from running from something like this." Kyle zoomed in with his phone, laughing. "This is gold. Let's see her cry." Trent, less certain, shifted uneasily, his eyes darting between Aisha and the dog. Aisha's gaze never wavered. She studied Rex, the angle of his ears, the tension in his muscles, with the same focus she'd once used to spot IEDs in the Afghan desert. Her heart beat steadily, her training a quiet hum beneath her skin. She'd faced death in a dozen forms. A guard dog, even one egged on by cruelty, was no match for her. "You sure you want to play this game?" she asked, her voice calm, but laced with a warning that made Trent swallow hard. "Because I'm not the one who's going to lose." Mason laughed, but it was forced, a crack in his facade. "Big talk for a nobody," he snapped, yanking the leash to urge Rex forward. The dog lunged, its jaws snapping inches from Aisha's legs. Customers gasped, and Jamal took a step forward, but Aisha raised a hand, stopping him. Her eyes locked onto Mason's, and for a moment, the cafe seemed to vanish, leaving only the two of them, a bully and a warrior, locked in a silent duel. Marcus's hands tightened around his mug, his instincts screaming to intervene, but he held back. He saw the fire in Aisha's eyes, the same fire that had saved his life under a hail of bullets. "She's got this," he whispered, his voice barely audible. He remembered her now, Trung C. Turner, Special Forces, dragging him to safety as sniper fire tore through the air. The scar on her arm, he realized, was from that day, a mark of sacrifice. Aisha took a single step forward, her presence commanding, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Call off your dog, Mason," she said, her tone low but unyielding, "or you'll wish you had." The words were not a threat, but a promise, delivered with the certainty of someone who'd faced far worse and walked away. Mason hesitated, his smirk faltering, but his pride wouldn't let him back down. "You don't scare me," he growled, but his voice betrayed a flicker of doubt. Kyle, still filming, jeered, "What's she gonna do, cry? Keep going, Mason." But the cafe's mood was shifting. Mrs. Lena's eyes gleamed with defiance, and the young couple began whispering, their phones now out, capturing the scene. Aisha's calm, her refusal to break, was a beacon, drawing the room's attention. She was no victim, and the officers, in their arrogance, were beginning to sense it. The lights buzzed overhead, the jazz a faint pulse in the background. Aisha Turner stood tall, her scar a badge of battles won, her patience a coiled spring. The dog's barks echoed, but they were no match for the storm brewing within her. A storm that would soon break, not in chaos, but in a justice as precise as her every move. The Soul Brew Cafe was a pressure cooker, its air thick with the snarls of Rex, the guard dog, and the venomous laughter of Mason Reed, Kyle Dawson, and Trent Palmer. The fluorescent lights flickered, casting jagged shadows across the linoleum floor, where Aisha Turner stood, unyielding, her scar a blazing emblem under the harsh glow. The German shepherd strained against Mason's leash, its barks a relentless assault, but Aisha's eyes, calm, piercing, held Mason in a gaze that made his smirk waver. Her warning, "Keep filming. That video's going to be your downfall," hung in the air like a guillotine, sharp and inevitable. The cafe's patrons, frozen in their seats, sensed a shift, as if the room itself were bracing for a storm. Mason, his broad frame tense, yanked Rex back, but his bravado was fraying. "You don't scare me, Scarface," he snapped, though his voice cracked, betraying a flicker of doubt. Kyle, still recording on his phone, jeered, "Yeah, what's a waitress gonna do? Cry to her mama?" Trent, the youngest, shifted nervously, his eyes darting to the dog, then to Aisha, whose stillness was a force, a quiet thunder that unnerved him. The jazz overhead was a ghost now, drowned by the chaos, and the cafe's hum had given way to a taut silence, broken only by Rex's growls. In the corner, Marcus Reed, the former Delta Force operative, leaned forward, his coffee long forgotten. His weathered hands tightened around his mug as he watched Aisha, her stance a mirror of the warrior he'd known in Afghanistan. The memory was clear now. Trung Si Aisha Turner, Special Forces, pulling him from a burning Humvee under sniper fire in Raqqa, 2018. Her scar, he realized, was from that day, a shard of shrapnel that hadn't stopped her from saving his life. He rose, his boots soft against the floor, and approached the counter, his voice low but firm. "Trung Si Turner," he said as Aisha passed, her tray steady despite the chaos. "Special Forces, Raqqa. You saved me from that sniper. I'd know that fire in your eyes anywhere." Aisha's gaze flicked to Marcus, a spark of recognition breaking her mask for a split second. "Not now, Reed," she murmured, her voice barely audible over Rex's barks. "But stay close." Her words were a command, and Marcus nodded, stepping back, his presence a silent anchor in the storm. He knew a warrior when he saw one, and Aisha was no ordinary waitress. She was a strategist, and the officers were walking into a trap they couldn't see. Mason, oblivious, tightened his grip on the leash, his frustration boiling over. "Enough games," he shouted, jerking Rex closer to Aisha, the dog's jaws snapping inches from her. "You think you're tough? Let's see you handle this." But before Aisha could respond, a new voice cut through the tension, sharp and trembling with emotion. "Aisha, Aisha Turner." A woman in her 40s, Tanya Brooks, rose from a table near the window, her eyes wide with disbelief. Her hands shook as she clutched her purse, her voice rising. "From Afghanistan? The medic who saved my unit in Kandahar?" The cafe seemed to tilt, the air shifting as all eyes turned to Tanya. She stepped forward, ignoring the dog, her gaze locked on Aisha. "It's you, isn't it?" she said, tears welling. 2019, that Humvee explosion. You pulled 3 of my guys out, even with your arm bleeding like that. You're a hero." Her words were a bombshell, and the room erupted in murmurs. Mrs. Lena gasped, whispering to her friend, "I knew she was special." Jamal the barista stared, his cloth forgotten, while the young couple by the window began filming, their phones capturing the moment. Aisha's composure wavered, her lips parting as she met Tanya's gaze. For a moment, the weight of her past, 3 tours, countless lives saved, a scar earned in fire, pressed against her. But she steadied herself, her voice low but clear. "Good to see you, Tanya," she said, then turned to Mason, her eyes like steel. "You wanted a story about my scar. It's from saving soldiers like her. Under fire, you'd never survive." The words landed like a slap, and Mason's smirk vanished, his face paling as the cafe's mood turned. Kyle, still filming, faltered, his phone shaking. "She's lying," he stammered, but his voice lacked conviction. Trent took a step back, his eyes wide, the leash slack in his hand. Aisha reached into her apron, pulling out her phone, her movements deliberate. "You've been loud for 6 months," she said, her voice cutting through the room, "bragging about planting evidence, beating suspects, breaking the law. I recorded every word." She tapped her screen, and Mason's voice echoed, "Planted some coke on that kid last week. Easy way to clean up the streets." The cafe gasped, and Kyle's phone dropped to the table, his face ashen. The room exploded in sound. Mrs. Lena's triumphant, "Yes!" The couple's whispers, Jamal's stunned silence. Tanya rushed forward, embracing Aisha, tears streaming. "You're still saving people," she whispered. Aisha returned the hug briefly, then stepped back, her eyes on Mason. "Those recordings," she said, "are with the FBI, the ACLU, and a reporter. You're done." Her voice was a verdict, final and unyielding. Mason staggered, the leash slipping from his hand as Rex quieted, sensing the shift. You can't do this," he stammered, but the cafe's applause drowned him out. Customers clapped, some standing, their phones still rolling, capturing the fall of a bully. Trent looked like he might bolt, while Kyle slumped in the booth, his bravado gone. Marcus crossed his arms, a faint smile on his lips, knowing he'd witnessed the first strike of a warrior's justice. Aisha stood tall, her scar glowing under the lights, no longer a mark of shame but a badge of valor. The cafe, once a battleground, was now her stage, and the officers, in their arrogance, had handed her the spotlight. The storm she'd held within was breaking, not in chaos, but in a truth that would shake the foundations of their world. The Soul Brew Cafe pulsed with raw energy, its fluorescent lights casting a harsh glow over a scene teetering on the edge of chaos. Aisha Turner stood at the center, her scar a blazing emblem of defiance, her phone still echoing Mason Reed's damning words. "Planted some coke on that kid last week. Easy way to clean up the streets." The air was electric, charged with the gasps and applause of patrons who'd just learned Aisha was no mere waitress, but a special forces hero, her identity unveiled by Tanya's tearful recognition and Marcus Reed's quiet confirmation. Mason, Kyle Dawson, and Trent Palmer, their Navy uniforms now a mockery of justice, sat frozen in their booth, faces pale as the weight of Aisha's recordings sank in. Rex, the guard dog, lay quiet, sensing the shift, his leash slack in Trent's trembling hand. Mason's broad frame slumped, his mean eyes darting like a cornered animal's. You can't do this," he stammered, his voice a hollow echo of his earlier bravado. But Aisha's gaze, steady as a sniper's, held him fast. "It's done," she said, her voice low and final, a verdict delivered with the precision of a blade. The cafe's applause swelled, Mrs. Lena's triumphant, "Yes," mingling with the murmurs of the young couple filming nearby. Jamal the barista stood rooted, his eyes wide with awe. Tanya, tears still wet on her cheeks, clutched Aisha's arm, whispering, "You're unstoppable." But Mason, driven by desperation, refused to yield. "You're lying," he roared, snatching Kyle's phone from the table, his fingers fumbling as he jabbed at the screen. "I'll show the world you're nothing but a loudmouth from the hood." In his panic, he didn't notice he'd hit the live stream button on his X account. the one he used to flaunt his badge and bravado. The phone's camera blinked red, broadcasting to thousands as he shouted, "This black girl thinks she can ruin us. She's nobody, just a scarred-up troublemaker who doesn't know her place." His words, venomous and unfiltered, poured into the digital void, each syllable a nail in his own coffin. Kyle, realizing the mistake, lunged for the phone. "Mason, stop! You're live," he hissed, but it was too late. Notifications flooded the screen, 10,000 viewers, 20,000, 50,000, comments pouring in with hashtags like "Should Justice for Aisha" and "Police Abuse." Trent, his boyish face ashen, dropped the leash, backing away as if the booth were a sinking ship. The cafe's patrons, sensing the turn, raised their phones, capturing Mason's meltdown. Mrs. Lena, her eyes blazing, muttered, "He's digging his own grave now?" Aisha saw the blinking red light and seized the moment. She stepped forward, her presence commanding, and leaned into the frame of Mason's phone, her scar glowing under the lights like a badge of valor. "My name is Trung C. Aisha Turner," she said, her voice clear and unyielding, resonating through the cafe and across the digital world. "I served 3 tours in Afghanistan, earned the Silver Star for saving 12 American soldiers. These officers thought they could break me because of my skin and my scars. But today they learned that justice doesn't bend to bullies." The cafe erupted, customers cheering, some standing on chairs, their phones live-streaming Aisha's words to their own followers. Tanya clapped, tears mixing with a fierce smile, while Jamal pumped his fist, shouting, "That's our girl!" Marcus, arms crossed, nodded with a warrior's respect, his memory of Aisha's courage in Raqqa now mirrored in this battlefield of a different kind. The young couple by the window typed furiously, their posts amplifying Aisha's declaration with hashtags that lit up X like wildfire. Mason's phone buzzed incessantly, calls from his precinct, his wife, his brother, each ring a death knell for his career. He stared at the screen, his face a mask of horror as comments flooded in. "Disgrace to the badge. Aisha's a hero. Arrest these cops." The view count soared past 100,000. The hashtag Justice for Aisha trending globally. Kyle, his bravado shattered, slumped in the booth muttering, "We're done." Trent, barely able to stand, looked to Mason for salvation. But Mason was a man unmoored, his arrogance crumbling under the weight of his own words. Aisha held up her wrist, the scar catching the light, and continued, her voice a beacon. "For 6 months, I recorded these men bragging about planting evidence, beating suspects, and abusing their power. Those recordings are with the FBI, the ACLU, and the press. This video you're watching, it's their confession, live for the world to see." She stepped back, her eyes locked on Mason, who dropped the phone, its camera still rolling, capturing his defeat. The cafe's door burst open, and Rosa, the manager, stormed in, her face a storm of righteous anger. "Aisha, you okay?" she demanded, then turned to the officers. "Get out of my cafe, now!" Customers cheered, some chanting Aisha's name, their phones a constellation of lights documenting the moment. Mrs. Lena stood, clapping, her voice rising. "That's what you get for messing with a queen." Marcus moved closer, his presence a quiet shield, ready to step in if the officers lashed out. But they were broken. Kyle staring at the floor, Trent trembling, Mason clutching the table like a drowning man. The phone kept buzzing, now with calls from news outlets, civil rights groups, even the mayor's office. The world was watching, and Aisha, with her scars and her truth, had turned their weapon against them. The fluorescent lights buzzed, the jazz a faint pulse in the background, but the cafe was alive with a new sound, the roar of justice. Aisha Turner, once invisible, now stood as a titan, her words a spark that would ignite a reckoning. The officers in their hubris had handed her a stage, and she had claimed it, not with violence, but with a truth that cut deeper than any blade. The Soul Brew Cafe, still reverberating from Aisha Turner's seismic stand, was a crucible of transformation. The fluorescent lights, once harsh, now bathed the room in a defiant glow, illuminating the faces of patrons who had witnessed a warrior's truth. Aisha stood at the center, her scar a radiant map of courage, her words, My name is Trungsi Aisha Turner, and justice doesn't bend to bullies. Still echoing across the digital world. Mason Reed, Kyle Dawson, and Trent Palmer, their Navy uniforms now symbols of disgrace, sat defeated in their booth, the weight of Mason's live-stream tirade crushing their arrogance. The phone, abandoned on the table, buzzed incessantly, its screen a flood of notifications as the hashtag Shocks Justice for Aisha trended globally with millions watching their downfall. Mason's broad shoulders slumped, his mean eyes glassy with panic. "This can't be happening," he muttered, his voice barely audible over the cafe's roar. Kyle, his wiry frame trembling, stared at the floor, while Trent, the youngest, clutched Rex's leash, his face pale as if he'd seen his future unravel. The guard dog lay silent, a reluctant witness to their collapse. Rosa, the manager, stood with arms crossed, her glare a storm of righteous fury. "You're done here," she snapped, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Get out before I call the law on you." The cafe erupted in cheers, Mrs. Lena leading the charge with a triumphant clap. "That's what you get for messing with our Aisha," she shouted, her teacup raised like a trophy. Jamal, the barista, pumped his fist, his awe for Aisha now a blazing pride. The young couple by the window, their phones still recording, posted updates to X, their captions amplifying Aisha's victory. "Hero takes down corrupt cops." Tanya Brooks, the military nurse who'd recognized Aisha, wiped tears from her cheeks, her voice soft but fierce. "You're still saving us, Aisha. Always will." Aisha, her posture unyielding, met Rose's gaze and nodded, a silent acknowledgement of their shared stand. She slipped her phone back into her apron. The recordings, 6 months of the officer's confessions, already in the hands of the FBI, the ACLU, and a tenacious reporter from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. The live video, now viewed by over 5 million, had sparked a firestorm, with news outlets clamoring for interviews and civil rights groups rallying behind Aisha. Her scar, once a target of ridicule, was now a symbol of resilience, shared across X with captions like, "This is what strength looks like." Marcus Reed, the Delta Force veteran, moved closer, his weathered face alight with respect. "You turned their weapon against them, Trungsi," he said, his voice low but resonant. "Raqqa all over again." Aisha's lips twitched, not quite a smile but a flicker of camaraderie. "Just doing what's right, Reed," she replied, her eyes scanning the cafe, noting every face, every phone, every whisper of support. She was no longer invisible, and the power of that shift coursed through her like a current. The officers, prodded by Rosa's glare, stumbled to their feet, Mason clutching his phone as if it could undo the damage. But the calls kept coming. His precinct, his wife, his lawyer, each ring a hammer blow to his crumbling world. Kyle muttered curses, his bravado reduced to ash, while Trent, near tears, dragged Rex toward the door. The chime jangled as they fled, the cafe's cheers chasing them into the Atlanta dusk. Mrs. Lena stood, her voice ringing. "And don't come back." The room laughed, a release of pent-up fury as patrons embraced Aisha's triumph. In the days that followed, the world reshaped itself around Aisha's stand. The Atlanta Police Department, under pressure from the viral video and Aisha's recordings, suspended Mason, Kyle, and Trent pending a federal investigation. Charges loomed: abuse of power, evidence tampering, racial profiling, each count a brick in the case built from Aisha's patience. The recordings, meticulously cataloged, exposed a pattern of corruption, implicating not just the trio but others in their precinct. News anchors dissected the story, calling Aisha the warrior waitress, her silver star from Afghanistan now a headline. Soul Brew became a pilgrimage site, its walls adorned with a new wall of heroes. Aisha's military portrait at its center, her uniform crisp, her scar proud. Veterans from across Georgia flocked to the cafe, sharing stories of their own battles inspired by Aisha's courage. Rosa promoted Aisha to assistant manager, but her role transcended the title. She was a beacon, greeting each visitor with the same steady grace that had unnerved Mason. Jamal hung a sign, "Home of Aisha Turner, American Hero," and the cafe buzzed with new life, its jazz now an anthem of victory. Aisha's influence rippled outward. She testified before a congressional committee on police reform, her calm voice echoing through Washington, demanding accountability. 3 states, inspired by her story, drafted laws protecting veterans from workplace discrimination, her scar a silent co-author. Marcus, now a permanent ally, partnered with Aisha to launch a nonprofit for Black veterans, helping them navigate civilian life. Their first meeting, held at Soul Brew, drew dozens, each face a testament to Aisha's impact. The community, once silent in the face of the officer's cruelty, transformed. Mrs. Lena organized a fundraiser for veterans, her corner table now a hub of activism. The young couple, inspired by Aisha, started a local X campaign, earning Respect the Unseen, urging respect for those society overlooks. Even Jamal, once shy, spoke openly about his brother's struggles with police harassment, his voice emboldened by Aisha's example. Under the cafe's lights, Aisha moved with purpose, serving coffee with the same precision that had defined her stand. Her scar, once a source of shame, was now a badge of honor, a story told in every handshake, every nod of respect. The officer's defeat was not just personal, but systemic, a crack in the wall of injustice. Soul Brew, once a stage for cruelty, was now a sanctuary of justice, and Aisha Turner, with her quiet strength, had made it so. 6 months after the storm that shook Soul Brew Cafe, the Atlanta air carried a new rhythm, a pulse of hope woven into the city's heartbeat. The cafe, once a stage for cruelty, now glowed under its fluorescent lights, a sanctuary where stories of resilience were shared over steaming mugs. Aisha Turner, no longer just a waitress, moved through the bustling space with the same quiet precision that had defined her stand against Mason Reed, Kyle Dawson, and Trent Palmer. Her scar, a jagged map from wrist to elbow, was no longer a mark of shame, but a beacon, drawing veterans, activists, and dreamers to the cafe's hallowed ground. The wall of heroes, adorned with Aisha's military portrait, stood proud, a testament to her courage and the countless others who'd found their voice in her shadow. The world beyond Soul Brew had shifted too. Aisha's recordings, 6 months of the officer's confessions, had sparked a federal investigation, toppling not just Mason, Kyle, and Trent, but a network of corruption within the Atlanta Police Department. The trio faced charges of evidence tampering and racial profiling, their badges stripped, their names synonymous with disgrace. The viral video, now viewed by over 10 million, had ignited a movement, with Hurakshir Justice for Aisha, a rallying cry for reform. Aisha, once invisible, was now a national figure, her silver star from Afghanistan a headline, her scar a symbol of unbreakable strength. Yet Aisha remained rooted, her apron still tied as she served coffee, a deliberate choice to honor her beginnings. The cafe buzzed with new faces, veterans swapping stories, students debating policy, locals sharing dreams. Mrs. Lena, her corner table a fixture, had become a vocal advocate, her fundraiser for veterans raising thousands. Our Aisha changed everything, she'd say, her teacup raised to the wall of heroes. Jamal, the barista, now led community talks, inspired by Aisha to speak out about his brother's struggles with police. Rosa, the manager, beamed as Soul Brew thrived, its sign, home of Aisha Turner, American hero, a magnet for pilgrims. Aisha's influence stretched far beyond Atlanta. She'd testified before Congress, her calm voice demanding police reform, her scar visible as she spoke of justice for all. 3 states passed laws protecting veterans from workplace discrimination, her story their catalyst. With Marcus Reed, her Delta Force ally, Aisha launched a nonprofit for Black veterans, their weekly meetings at Soul Brew a lifeline for those navigating civilian life. Tanya Brooks, the nurse who'd recognized Aisha, joined as a counselor, her own scars, emotional and physical, a bridge to those they served. But the past had a way of lingering. One gray afternoon, as rain streaked the cafe's windows, the door chime jangled, and Mason Reed stepped inside. Gone was the swagger, the crisp uniform. He wore a faded jacket, his broad frame hunched, his eyes hollow. The cafe fell silent, mugs pausing mid-sip, eyes narrowing. Aisha, wiping the counter, looked up, her face unreadable. Mason shuffled forward, his voice low, broken. Aisha, I need to talk. I'm sorry, I was wrong. Please take those recordings down. They're ruining me. The room bristled, Mrs. Lena muttering, "He's got some nerve." Jamal crossed his arms, ready to intervene, but Aisha raised a hand, her gesture calming the storm. She stepped around the counter, her scar catching the light, and poured a coffee, sliding it to Mason with the same grace she'd always shown. "Sit," she said, her voice steady, not warm but not cold. Mason sank into a chair, his hands shaking as he clutched the mug, his eyes pleading. "You think this is about revenge?" Aisha asked, her tone measured, each word a stone laid carefully. "You humiliated me, mocked my skin, my scars, my people. But I didn't fight to destroy you, Mason. I fought to show the world what justice looks like." She leaned closer, her eyes locking his, unyielding. "Your recordings stay, not to punish you, but to teach you, and everyone, that respect isn't earned with a badge. It's owed to every soul." Mason's face crumpled, his voice a whisper. "My wife left me. My kids won't speak to me. I've got nothing." Aisha's gaze softened, not with pity, but with clarity. "You had power, and you used it to hurt. That's not a misunderstanding, Mason. That's who you chose to be." She straightened, her scar a quiet fire. "Now live with it." The cafe exhaled, patrons nodding, some clapping softly. Mason rose, defeated, and shuffled out, the rain swallowing his shadow. Mrs. Lena called out, "That's our Aisha. Class in every word." The room laughed, the tension breaking, and Soul Brew hummed with life again. Aisha's legacy grew, not in vengeance, but in creation. She spoke at universities, her scar visible as she urged students to fight for equity. Companies once silent sought her as a consultant, desperate to rebuild trust. Her CNN interview, watched by millions, ended with a quiet truth. "My scars tell my story, but they don't define me. What defines us is how we rise." Her words sparked campaigns from Respect the Unseen to local laws protecting service workers. Soul Brew remained her anchor. Aisha served coffee each week, her apron a reminder of her roots, her smile a promise to those who felt unseen. Veterans filled the cafe, their stories weaving a tapestry of resilience. Marcus, now a partner in their nonprofit, watched her with pride, knowing Raqa's warrior had conquered a new battlefield. Tanya, counseling a young vet, smiled as Aisha passed, their shared history a silent bond. The fluorescent lights buzzed, the jazz a soft anthem, and Soul Brew stood as a monument to justice. Aisha Turner, scarred and unbowed, had turned humiliation into a movement, her legacy a fire that warmed the overlooked and burned the unjust. As she poured coffee, her scar glowed, not as a wound, but as a star a guide for those who dared to rise. What an incredible journey with Aisha Turner, a warrior who turned scars into stars. Her story of courage and justice leaves us all inspired. Now it's your turn to share. Drop a comment below. What moved you most about Aisha's stand? How has her fight sparked your own thoughts on justice? Your voice matters, so let us know where you're tuning in from. A huge thank you for joining us at Soul Brew's unforgettable battleground. Don't miss our next tale of triumph. Subscribe and hit the bell to stay in the loop. Until then, keep fighting for what's right, and we'll see you soon.